So welcome now to this second panel session, which will focus on pathways to low carbon futures. This is something we've been talking a lot about, but this time I'll be speaking to experts from different fields to explore the development of low carbon pathways. We'll be discussing the overarching aspects of low carbon development across transport models, how they can be developed in collaboration with key stakeholders, and how the development of such pathways will support governments in accessing climate finance. That's something we heard a lot about in our previous session as well. And to explain further, I'd like to introduce this video message next from Rob de Jong from the United Nations Environmental Programme, where he heads the Sustainable Mobility Units. Please watch the video.
Good day. This is Rob de Jong, head of the Sustainable Mobility Unit at the United Nations Environment Programme. I'm happy to join you today from Nairobi, Kenya, from our global headquarters. I want to start by thanking the ADB for organizing the Asia-Pacific Transport Forum again, and for inviting me to jointly be it via video. So I think we all recognize the world has now started its global shift to zero emissions mobility. Zero emissions mobility needs action in a range of areas. Promotion of active transport, ensuring walking and cycling facilities, switching from private vehicle use to public transport, and thirdly, shifting to electric mobility with zero emissions. None of these three are going to achieve the targets we've set on air quality and climate change. We need them all three, and we need them all three closely combined. This needs to be a truly global switch. It cannot be a switch where the global north is going and the global south is left to use fossil fuels and not meet the targets. If we need to meet the Paris climate targets, we need a truly global shift. We still have major challenges, especially in the global south, in achieving that shift. Challenges in the area of policies. For example, few countries have set targets and roadmaps to phase out internal combustion engine vehicles. Challenges in terms of infrastructure. Few cities have proper walking and cycling facilities so people can walk. Challenges in terms of technology supply. Here in Africa, many cities are introducing bus rapid transit system, but have no access to electric buses. And finally, challenges in terms of finance. How do we finance this global transition? UNEP's Sustainable Mobility Programme is working in all of these policies, infrastructure, technology, and finance. And we're pleased to work closely with the ADB. Together, we're supporting the electric mobility in Asia. Supported by the GEF, we're supporting countries and regions switching to zero emissions electric mobility. I'm looking forward to continue that work with ADB, but to work together with all of you in Asia and outside of Asia to achieve zero emissions mobility worldwide. I wish you a very successful forum. Thank you.
And that was Rob de Jong from UNEP. What a great opening message. Now, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists for this session. We can start with Mark Howells. He's from Climate Compatible Growth, or CCG's Program Director, and he's led some development of the world's premier open source energy, resource, and spatial electrification planning tools. He's published in several nature journals, coordinated the European Commission's think tank for energy, and is regularly called upon as a science policy expert. Can I call you upon the stage, please, Mark? Thank you. And next up, we have Sophal Kong, who is the Deputy Director General from the Ministry of Public Works and Transport from Cambodia, and he's held various positions within the Ministry of Public Works and Transport for over 30 years. Mr. Kong, please come and join us on stage. Yes, please clap. That's great. And next up, we have Mr. Roy Mumu, the Senior Transport Advisor from the Department of Transport, PMG. He's just stepped down as Transport Secretary, breaking news, and he's been in the public sector for over 40 years, and his major focus areas have been in ports and freight infrastructure. And next, we have Alice Yu, who's the Director for Policy Outreach at SLOCAT. That's an organization made up of partnerships that are powering just transition towards healthy, green, and resilient transport and mobility systems for the people and planet. She's got over a decade worth of experience in global policy advocacy for climate change and sustainability. And we have Marcella Jaramillo, who is the program manager of the 2050 Pathways platform, where she leads engagement with development banks, building collaborative work on long-term climate strategies. And finally, we have, please clap, yes. And finally, we have Kanzo Nakai, the director for the transport sector group from the ADB. He's been with the ADB for over a decade, has delivered many transport projects, including Metro Urban Expressway with electric toll collection and civil aviation sector reform. Wonderful to see you all here on the stage with me. And remember, you can all ask me questions, which I can get on this iPad, and I will be addressing those questions to our panelists later. But let's begin with opening statements from each of you before we get into our questions for the panel session. And let's start with you, Mark, on the data to deal approach and modeling for low carbon pathways in places like Vietnam and Lao PDR.
Thank you very much. Just to ask if the slide would be put up. Okay, well, while the slide's being put up, it's an absolute privilege to be here. It's an honor. We do a lot of work together with partners that are in this room focusing on something that we call data to deal. So thank you, if you could move to the next slide, please. So how we go from collecting the data that's required through all of the analysis that gets done by different ministries, going through to mobilizing finance. Now, it's the case that if this is done correctly, large amounts of finance can be mobilized. There are large quantities of finance associated with greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation, or improved resilience that is there for the taking. However, this is often not taken up, and it's often not taken up because governments and planners and others often work in silos with different objectives. And there's often a loss in information as things move from one ministry to another. In the slide, sorry, if you could go back to the previous slide. Okay, so this slide, I didn't realize how small it would render, but in the top right-hand corner over there, you see the results of some case studies that have been recently completed where this data to deal methodology has been put in place. And Marcella, who will speak a little bit later, is one of the original architects of this process. But as you'll see, large amounts of concessionary finance mobilized, $2.4 billion in Costa Rica, a small country, so a relatively large amount of funding. Similarly, 6.5 in the Dominican Republic, close to $1 billion in Uruguay, and 2.2 billion in Chile, following these particular methodologies that have been put together. Why is this important? Just think about this for a second. Let's think about a country that wants to move into buses, into electric buses. Often the transport ministry will be interested in this because it's going to reduce local pollution. Importantly, it's potentially going to improve access to transport. And there are various other things that it might be able to do with economic growth, all things that a transport ministry is passionate and rightly passionate about. Information from that policy might not translate to the energy ministry. The energy ministry will have other objectives that are important for the country, but it's also going to want to know, well, exactly how much oil do I need to refine now that there's going to be this shift in transport? How much electricity do I need to generate? What new electricity infrastructure do I need to put in place? If that information is not translated in the right terms, it often will not find its way into the energy planning analysis. Likewise, the Environment Ministry will be thinking about NDCs and emission mitigation and so on. And if the stuff from the Transport Ministry hasn't been translated into the Energy Ministry, information about energy changes and uses are not going to be translated into the Environment Ministry. And the Environment Ministry's development of nationally determined contributions and other things that it can use to leverage to pull in finance is going to be inconsistent. And then you have the Finance Ministry that will need to think about, well, where's its tax base going to come from now? If we're going to move from cars to electric buses, what does that mean for my fiscal space? And if it's the case that you have to import oil in order to run the cars that you're going to be displacing with the buses, this means that there's potentially an important change in balance of payments and so on. And if this information has not been correctly translated, the Finance Ministry is not going to sign off on any low carbon mitigation futures that look at changing the transport fleet potentially. So this particular process, and Marcella will talk about some of the organizational components of it in a minute, just helps us to go through the various bits of the analytical cycle so we can pull things together so that at the end of it, the finance ministry has the same picture, coherent picture as the transport ministry, the energy ministry, the environment ministry. That means that the IFI that is typically sitting with or has access to large quantities of finance that are tied up with lower carbon emissions trajectories will get two things. Number one, they'll get a consistent picture for how the economy could decarbonize, which allows it to mobilize these large amounts of finance. And the second thing is, and this is important because the finance ministry typically has the relationship with the IFI, the finance ministry has sign-off because it's thought through all of these things around the fiscal parts of the country that it has to worry about. In Laos, you'll see we're busy working in Laos and Vietnam together with stakeholders putting these data-to-deal processes in place. I should mention that another thing that's critical in this approach is to make sure that it's driven by government. So a lot of the work that we do is working with universities in order to make sure that there's the capacity and bandwidth in country to develop these strategies and this particular process. But we developed these tools together with folk in university and government. So on the top right-hand side, you see a picture for Laos, which allows you to have a look at changing transport policies. You see avoid, shift, and improve. But then it also allows you to change energy policies or other policies. So let's say you move to electric vehicles. That gives you an opportunity to move to renewable energy or other low carbon energies at the same time. And immediately you can see things through the lens of the transport ministry, through the lens of the energy ministry, through the lens of the environment ministry, and you see all of the changes that happen with respect to imports and exports. So you see it through the fiscus lens of the finance ministry, which allows people to come to a coherent picture very quickly. I'll stop there just to say that the work in Laos and Vietnam is going really well. It's a privilege to be able to work there. And a lot of our time at the moment is spent working between ministries to try and develop these coherent pictures that then can be translated into something that is actionable and allows for finance to be mobilized. There is a lot of finance that's potentially available. With the correct organization of actors and information, it's possible to go from data to deal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. As you say, a lot of finance, billions of dollars worth, and it's so crucial to have the right data for that coherent picture that needs to be painted. Now we move on to Sophal Kong, who can tell us about decarbonization across the transport modes in Cambodia.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Allow me to begin by expressing my thanks to the organizers for inviting me as a panelist for this very crucial event. Very difficult and very challenging for me to describe all the policy in 4 minutes. So I try to summarize it into a written document. So I try to read it. So the royal government of Cambodia is committed, strongly committed to combating climate change and accelerating the transition to the climate resilient, low carbon and sustainable development by adopting several policies and strategies. I would like to highlight three of them as follows. First one is the Cambodia updated nationally determined contribution, which we already submitted this document to the UNFCCC in December 2020. It set a clear target to decrease the emission by 41.7% from the business as usual scenario by 2030. And it identifies 33 mitigation actions for all related sectors for implementations. And of course, 5 of them are assigned to the Ministry of Public Works and Transport, where I belong to. So one of them is promoting the integrated public transport system in main city. Second one is enhancing and maintenance of inspection of vehicle. And third one, promotion of electric vehicle. So fourth, establishment of green belt along major road for climate change mitigation. And last one, safe long distance freight movement from truck to train. Of these 5 actions contribute to the SDG number 3, 5, 8, and 9. And the second document that we have already just adopted and sent to the UNFCCC in December 2021 is the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality, which we set the desire to keep the global temperature increase by below 1.5 Celsius degree. It also identified 35 key mitigation measures, which 5 of them assigned to the transport sectors. First one, promote the more use of public transport by 30% modal share in urban city by 2050. And second one, moderate the penetration of electric vehicles 70% by 70% and 40% of the car by 2050. The third one, increase the fuel efficiency for the internal combustion engine vehicle. Number four, promotion of rail for freight and passenger. And last one, enhancing the CNG penetration by 80% for inter-regional buses and truck by 2050. Next slide, please. And next, please. Okay, thank you. And recently, our government just approved a very important document we call the Comprehensive Intermodal Transport and Logistics System Master Plan 2023 and 2033, which this document was jointly developed by 3 entities. The first one, the Supreme National Economic Council. Second one, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and our Ministry from Transport. The master plan set 2 strategic principles, transport principle 3341, and the logistic principle 22N. I'm shown in the map. And the master plan identified 174 priority projects related to road, rail, inland waterways, maritime, air transport, logistic facilities, and other sub-components, with the total estimation of $36.6 billion for the next 10 years. So Cambodia is welcome all investors to study and invest for those projects. With that, I would like to conclude my remarks, my statement, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kong. And now we move on to Mr. Mumu. Tell us about PNG and its low carbon pathways, particularly with the Futures and Foresights method, to envision the future of transportation and targets.
Thank you, Saranjit, for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I think it's important to share the Papua New Guinea story. So I've shared that map there, which is very clear on how PNG is, with a land area of 786,000 square kilometers, and the experiences we're going through, especially providing transport infrastructures. With that land area, my country is also serviced by 22 national airports, 15 main ports. It's also linked to other 100 or so private wharves and jetties. And of course, on that map, 32,000 kilometers of roads that services the main strategic national network and to the sub-national networks also. Some of the investment initiatives that has been pursued to incorporate carbon pathways in transport is under that Connect PNG. For the 3 modes of transportation, let me just make reference to the land. The Department of Works and Highways managing the road network, but importantly, how the road network is being used. So thanks to the partnership between our Climate Change Development Authority and the Global Green Growth Initiative, we now have an e-mobility initiative that intends to introduce electric vehicles in PNG. Thanks to the ADB technical assistance also, we have future development pathways that is supporting Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. We participated in virtual meetings, and of course, 2 months ago was a workshop that was held in Port Moresby. I'm also encouraged by another Asian Development Bank technical assistance to introduce electric vehicles in Port Moresby in partnership with the Municipal Authority, National Capital District, Department of Transport, and of course the regulator, Road Traffic Authority. In addition to that, we're introducing vehicle policy and delivery framework, which should be ready next month. I think the intention is to make sure that also, although we are not great emitters, we are the recipient of that, so we need to focus on resilience and mitigation matters. For the land and road network, Department of Works and Highways, I'm encouraged that they are now adopting climate resilience design for roads and bridges. We're always affected by a road being cut off due to collapsed bridges, landslides, due to earthquakes, and we had an earthquake 2 days ago, just before we left. So these are demands that we need to make sure that we adopt mitigation methods. I think for aviation, is acknowledged that the ADB supported us in a civil aviation development investment program, with CADIP 1 completed in June 2022, and we're into CADIP 2 now, which was launched just last Friday on the other side of the country, where my minister here, Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation, Walter Sloban, and our Prime Minister, Lon State. So for maritime, it is encouraging also to acknowledge the ADB support to our climate resilience first pilot wharf in Alatau, which is the easternmost part of the New Guinea mainland. So the design for that and the specification are being developed by our PNG Ports Corporation Limited to be adopted throughout the country, because we have 15 maritime provinces. So it's encouraging that even though we don't contribute to big emissions, we need to make sure that we plan accordingly going forward. So I think that's it. I think for the opportunity, some thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mumu. Absolutely, that's such a wise counsel. Mitigation and adaptation is crucial. Let's go over to you now, Alice Yu, to give us an overview of low carbon transport policy development in the region and the just transition.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to start with some highlights where the region is and how we can move forward towards a low carbon future. We know what the biggest challenge is for the region. We've been talking about this already on set for today's forum. It is the region with the highest transport CO2 emissions, also with the fastest transport emissions growth. And that is a pattern that has gone for more than a decade. And in fact, before 2015, Asia was predicted to almost double its emissions by mid-century. And the good news about it is that we are finally moving away from this trajectory. But even so, with its current growth rate, Asia's transport emissions would still not peak before 2050, whereas a net zero pathway would require emissions to peak by 2025. So there's still a lot of gap for us to fill. And we do see the momentum for it from the NDCs submitted under the Paris Agreement. At least 14 Asian countries have set economy-wide pledges towards net zero emissions, and 19 countries setting specific targets for electric mobility, rail, and modal share. And we are seeing this significant surge of public transport in Asian cities, marked by the expansion of bus rapid transits, metro, and light rail. They are also home to the world's largest bike-sharing market, and it continues to be a global leader in electric vehicles, but that also goes beyond just cars. When the region is home to 95% of the world's electric vehicle fleet, actually 90% of that fleet is two-wheelers. Informal transport through 2 to 3-wheelers can represent up to 40 to 60% of commuting trips in some major Asian cities. So electrifying informal transport not only has great mitigation potential, but also is a key to unlock clean and equitable access to public transport, as well as giving a very significant important source of employment for many people. And lastly, the region has experienced the fastest uptake of renewable energy used in transport. What we're witnessing here is a momentum to, on the one hand, reducing energy demand with better access to public transport, walking and cycling and rail, while on the other hand, increasing the supply of renewable energy in transport for multiplier effects. On a more positive note, I need to click on this. I'm sorry. And the next one. There's supposed to be a slide about the Pacific region, I'm sorry. But the Pacific region actually has a completely different setup. It contributes only 2% of the global transport emissions, but actually 25% of its total emissions comes from transport, which is more than a double than that in Asia. And the big reason for this is that private cars continue to dominate passenger transport trips in the region, even in places with good public transport coverage. So in some Pacific countries, motorization growth could become close to more than 40% over the last decade. And EV uptake still lags behind other regions, and the increasing popularity of larger vehicles like SUVs or trucks, they're undermining that emissions gains that we have earned from selling electric vehicles. Cycling and micromobility remains an untapped opportunity, and we still need to see a more concerted push from the government and the private sector to kind of begin that self-reinforcing cycle of uptake. And on a more positive note, multiple Pacific countries are raising their ambition towards achieving net zero carbon in shipping by 2050. We also must remember that natural disasters contribute to huge financial losses, disrupt transport systems and livelihoods in the region. And globally, $8 billion are lost every year in direct damages to transport systems in low and middle income countries, and many of them belongs to that region. There are growing investments now to strengthen transport resilience in the Pacific countries. That also highlight the fundamental role that decarbonization can play to greater resiliency. So in short, a drastic shift from the status quo is necessary, and evidence has repeatedly shown that these changes will really come with society-wide benefits, and there's momentum for it, but what we need now is action at the scale and the speed required. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Well said. A good roundup of the need for transport policy engagement and development. Next up, we have Marcella Jaramillo. Obviously, Mark talked a lot earlier about how your 2050 Pathways platform is very much part of that Data to Deal program. But tell us a little bit more about the platform in Latin America and lessons that you've learned from stakeholder engagement.
Sure, thank you very much. Very happy to be here, and really thank you for the organizers for this invitation. So yes, I want to complement a little bit some of these ideas that Mark already mentioned and bring to you some of the experience that we, the 2050 Pathways platform, have gathered from supporting and advising over 50 countries worldwide on the development of the long-term climate strategies. And to really understand the role of the stakeholder engagement, I want to start really from the key question that we all wonder and that we always get when we go to a country, and is how this planning, these strategies that countries are doing because are part of the Paris Agreement commitment that they have signed to, how can those work actually deliver on the climate finance or the finance that they need to deliver on the solutions that country want to see. So in our experience, really this conversation, the effective conversations on finance go back to first really understanding the transformations that are required in the real economy. This is really about looking at how can we aim for transformations in our countries that achieve both climate and development goals. And here is the first moment where we need to gather stakeholders from multiple angles to have a conversation when we understand what are the multiple priorities that we as a country have, the ambitions, the desires that we want to see our country to achieve in multiple areas. Again, this is not just a conversation about GHG emission reduction. This is about how do we achieve the multiple objectives that we have, and for that we need multiple points of view. We need multiple ministers, like Mark was mentioning. We will need the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Transport, Planning, Finance, municipalities, multiple stakeholders to really understand what this transformation entails. And just very simple example of what I mean by this first point is, and we already hear from some of the colleagues here, some of the transformations that we are seeing that we know we need for GHG emission reductions are, for example, expanding public transport, clean public transport, and also expanding the use of electric mobility. But we know that this will come with multiple development benefits that are of interest for multiple actors in a country, and we need to understand them, right? So we know that, for example, these measures can have a very positive improvement in health by improving air quality, by reducing accidents, and this has also a benefit in the public bills for health that we pay and for the quality of life of people. But there may be many other development benefits that we could look into. We also know that these type of measures can help to reduce congestion, traffic congestion, which has a massive impact in how much time we spend every day in traffic, and how that implies also an impact in the economic productivity of a country. So we're starting to hit many objectives when we start thinking about the multiple benefits that can generate these transformations. Another one is, for example, improving employability of people in cities that can mobilize more easy with affordable transport, and that can also have implications in people's quality of life, livelihoods, and economy. So really to understand those transformations and to think about how they will bring all of these different benefits will be important to get everyone behind what needs to be done. So the question is not anymore, should we do this? Are we going to do this? Is we want to do this. Now, how do we do this? What we have found in many countries, particularly some examples in Latin America and the Caribbean, is that a lot of the analyses that are being carried out now include cost-benefit analysis, and they always come back with a very clear financial benefit of delivering these transformations. Now, the second thing is, even though we want these transformations, many stakeholders want them, there are still barriers that will deter those to be implemented. So we need to understand those barriers. And here again is when we need to gather, again, as part of this process of the strategy, with multiple stakeholders to really understand what are the underlying barriers that are deterring us for delivering this that we want. In our experience, what we found is often these barriers are related to policy and regulation that may be preventing new business models to take place, enabling infrastructure. So for example, bike lanes that will enable more people to take up, for example, biking, or for example, the electric charging system. So there is a much more incentive to actually expand the electric vehicles. And there may be also fiscal incentive, cost of capital, that need to be understood in the context of the country. And the richness of this comes from the stakeholders that will come and bring us the views of what is really holding up some of these actions. And then finally, and very important, the third point, is it is very important to gather again all stakeholders, and from these reflections build a roadmap of what are the measures in the government hands that will help to address some of these barriers to deliver those transformations. So this is about how can the government lift some of these specific barriers, and how can they not only define what is the long-term goals and the milestones they want to see for electric vehicles, for transport, but also identify what are the milestones over time and what needs to happen now. A very quick example of a country that did all this process with stakeholder engagement, with the type of analytical tools that Mark was talking about, was Costa Rica. So Costa Rica developed their long-term strategy, which is called the Decarbonization Plan, in which transport was a key sector for them to deliver the transformations. And as part of this plan, they identified the milestones to achieve over time by 2050, 2040, 2035, 2030, and more importantly, they identified the actions that the government will carry out in the following 3 to 4 years under the current government to kickstart those transformations. Many of them in institutional reorganization, policy analysis, new policy development. And that list of activities that were going to be carried out with responsibilities for the government resulted in leveraging more than $2.4 billion in support from different development banks in less than 2 years. And this is quite relevant for a country of this size. And as Mark presented, this has been replicated in many countries, and is really a way to think through how do we do these exercises in a way that will get us to mobilize finance and really start moving the transformations that we need to see on the ground.
Thank you so much for that, Marcella. And yeah, absolutely crucial to have that stakeholder engagement. Now, finally, Kanzo Nakai, tell us about the ADB's climate vision. We've called it the Climate Bank. So give us a sense of the kind of programs and projects it has in place for lowering carbon mobility.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm talking about ADB's strategy and operational priority on that, decarbonization pathways in the transport sector. Maybe starting with the overall ADB strategy to fight the climate change issues, maybe broadly covered by the Uchon's opening remarks, also Hiro mentioned already. But in line with that Paris Agreement and also the subsequent COP meetings, ADB declared itself as a climate bank in Asia and Pacific. And to support these initiatives, ADB has committed to provide 100 billion climate financing between 2019 to 2030. It's a really ambitious target compared with that climate financing amount in the preceding years. While looking at the 2023 performance in ADB, actual climate financing amount last year is about 10 billion. So, that it's more or less on track at the moment. It's the marvelous kind of achievement so far. But not only that financial resources to be mobilized for climate financing, but also we try to change ourselves to be more fitable to that climate change kind of, the fighting, particularly for the institutional setting will be changed last year, so-called new operating model. So that in order to make the ADB more climate shift and the private sector development, in June last year, we have changed our organization. And also in the strategy 2030, it's our operational Bible in ADB. So the climate change is that first highest priority areas ADB needs to support. And during the midterm review of that 2030, also we remain that, that priority. Climate change is the highest, the first priority in ADB's operation. So what will be that overall ADB's strategy for the climate change has impact on that transport sector operation? So looking at the pie chart, Hiro already explained about that the changes from 2010 to 2023. He mentioned in 2010, 90% is that road sector. Actually, my figure is a bit different, it's 80%. So maybe some discrepancies are there, but at least in 2010, 90% of that our portfolio is going to that the road subsector. But actually, that followed by a small number of railway, maybe 15%. You look at urban transport, only 1% at that time. But in 2023, it changed drastically. Road reduced 45%, less than half. Railway a little bit increased to 20%. Urban transport increased drastically to 23%. So we have made significant shift or expanding our portfolio to that kind of urban transport or railway system so far. Hiro repeatedly mentioned, still we continue to work for the road subsector as well, that's true. Just to share is reduced, but the absolute total value of the financing amount in 2010 in ADB total is about 13 to 14 billion. 2023, 25 billion. So it's doubled during that period. So share is reduced, but actual amount financed to road sector more or less same. So they just focus on that low carbon transport, road subsector is a bit set aside. So maybe we have 3 pillars for our operation. The first one is that modal shift from the private vehicle or maybe road transport to public transport system. Well, for cargo system, maybe railway system to be utilized. Typical case is a metro, urban rail, bus rapid transit, public buses, some railway system for cargo improvement. That will be the first pillar we will support. The second would be improvement of energy efficiency itself. Basically, it's e-mobility or EVs, e-buses. Maybe new technology, hydrogen vehicles, that could be still a possibility. But talking about a little bit about NMT, non-motorized transport, pedestrians, bikes, e-bikes would be also quite important. More generally, kind of urban traffic management could improve that energy efficiency of that the urban transport flows. The third pillar is also important. The first one, second one would be more downstream activities. But we need a good policy environment ecosystem to implement that kind of project, in particular in new areas? Maybe DMC may not have sufficient policy framework, planning, the ecosystem, so that would be really important. I want to emphasize that point here. I have another slide, in the second slide, but since I have consumed 4 minutes allocated to me, I stop here. If I have some time, maybe I can explain later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kanzo. That's really great. And yeah, we do want to hear about the other projects in store. Now, Mark, I'm going to come back to you because we know CECG supports low and middle income countries in accelerating economic growth, but at the same time, we know that driving down carbon emissions could impact that economic growth. It's a really fine line, isn't it? So what are some of the key challenges for governments to maintain balance between growth and low carbon development?
No, thank you very much indeed. It's an important question. And indeed, the program that we run is called Climate Compatible Growth. We recognize that growth is an important part of this agenda. So finding out the pieces that align with growth and reduce emissions at the same time, we think is just important for development generally. I'd say there are two things that can create stresses inadvertently. One is if we just allow things to keep on happening organically. As Marcella said a few minutes ago, it's the case that actually there are huge opportunities to be had by doing certain kinds of decarbonization. Lower costs, better health, better balance of payments, and a whole set of other things. And in order to realize that, we need to be able to take proactive action with political will, which means that we need coherent numbers. The other thing, which I think can be equally harmful, is the idea that no matter what we do, we mustn't increase emissions at all. And that can constrain things. For example, we still want people to have access to transport. That's important. It may well be that if you build a road in the short term, you're going to increase emissions. But if that's part of a holistic strategy to decarbonize the electricity sector and provide electricity for electric vehicles or other low carbon vehicles, in the long term, that creates a bigger net zero emission ambition, and at the same time helps to meet some of the goals that are there. So I'd say perhaps key to this is political will and coherent planning across different ministries.
That's right, and that's where your data comes in as well with the coherent planning. That's so crucial, isn't it? And Sophal Kong, during your opening statement, we heard about Cambodia's policies and plans for low carbon pathways, but how do you see the challenges that Cambodia is facing to implement those policies?
Thank you very much. It is true that Cambodia developed and adopted a good policies with regard to addressing the climate change and environmental protection. But on the other hand, there is a huge gap between the policy and the real practice. Cambodia is still a private vehicle dominant country. We are a small country with 16 million people. Right now, we have 7 million vehicles registered under the Ministry of Transport. So, in fact, most seriously, those vehicles are second-hand and powered by the fossil fuel. So, private vehicle keep increasing. It doesn't mean that we are rich, but there's no choice for our people because our public transport system is not yet reliable, affordable. So there's no choice for them. They tend to buy their own private vehicle. So that coming to the main challenge, why we don't develop public transport system? Because more and more complicated. Even though we already, with the support from Japan, from JICA, we already developed a very comprehensive transport master plan in our city. But when, it include various modes of public transport, including BRT, rail, light rail, subway. But whenever it's very comprehensive, inclusive, too many issues. But when we talk to the Ministry of Finance, they say you put too many issues, so it become very expensive, so they cannot provide. So the main challenge for us is the financing. we should try our best, and I hope that we in the future, 5 to 10 years, we can have more mode of public transport. But right now we have only regular, like 15 lines of regular buses, and we are in the process of upgrading to BRT. So secondly, with regard to the adoption of electric vehicle, it seems a bit slow for Cambodia, although we have developed we have drafted a policy from our transport side, but there's a lot of financial incentive need to be requested from the financial people. They always reject that. So we'll try again to push the policy to be adopted, and we hope that in the near future, when the policy is adopted, maybe the electric vehicle, the cost of electric vehicle can be reduced, and maybe we can promote more EV. And another point, for freight transport, we still rely on the road transport, because our rail, of course, we have 2 rail network in Cambodia, but our rail network is very poor condition. So the speed is still very low. We try to upgrade it very soon. So I think in the future, when we can upgrade our rail network to accommodate freight, then we can reduce the freight movement by road. I think I stopped from there. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I mean, cost is a real prohibitive factor, and as you mentioned, financing is crucial. Mr. Mumu, we can move on to you. We know there are demands for infrastructure development all across transport modes in PNG. How does your government currently focus the investment on transport projects?
Thank you very much. My main slide that was presented earlier did identify my government's medium-term development plan, the 4th version, covering the period from 2023 to 2027. Of that plan, the anticipated funding to the transport sector is $3 billion. It's going to be delivered in partnership with our key stakeholders, including Asian Development Bank. Currently, Asian Development Bank is supporting us with $800 million. I know from the plan that by 2027, ADB should increase that funding support to $1.768 billion. So that's very encouraging, including our other key development partners. So the government is committed to that. It's going to be delivered in partnership. In relation to highlights of our key policies, as I alluded to earlier, we are developing an electric vehicle policy through a mobility arrangement with the stakeholders. We're also developing a railway policy, yes, in anticipation of linking up our country, especially in the low-lying areas. In addition to that, we are updating our aviation policy. All up, connectivity is the key message. We need to be vigilant on resilience approaches to natural disasters. Roads is a major need for the country, and that's where Connect PNG was initially perceived. The message is not only on the national network, but also going rural in the 3 modes of transportation. So I thank the ADB for the opportunity for us to share going forward. As far as future pathways are concerned, as I alluded to earlier, ADB, you've had the experience. Let's share it so that for us as developing countries, lessons learned. I'm aware certain initiatives to address mitigation methods. There's also new design modalities for roads. It can be delivered, and importantly, our roads can be sustained for road maintenance. So thank you, ADB and the team, for giving us PNG the opportunity to share our PNG story. Not an easy country to manage from the transport sector perspective. And I thank my minister who is here to tell and complete the story when he participates in the panel tomorrow. For us in PNG, the message is Connect PNG, not only domestically, but also internationally. Earlier or last week, there were discussions at our border, northern border town of Wanimo, between our foreign affairs ministers, between Indonesia and our PNG foreign affairs minister, to look at road connectivity, cross-border PNG vehicles can cross across to Indonesia and likewise. So we're looking at expanding that and realizing that MOU, which I hope can be concluded in about 2 months' time. So all up, the PNG story, I hope you can appreciate the challenge that we go through in the 3 modes of transportation. Not easy, but we will get there. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share PNG story again. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Mumu. And it's good to hear the PNG story. As you say, it's a difficult and challenging process, but so many opportunities ahead to get it right. Now, Alice, we know COP28 calls for responsible and just transition that empowers climate-positive development everywhere, particularly across the global south. So when planning climate action, though, oftentimes the impacts on the people who move our transport systems and our supply chains are not considered. So how can we change this?
Thank you for this very important question, because I think as we plan for a low carbon future, we cannot just talk about vehicles and infrastructure and services. We need to talk about the people and the workers that are actually the lifeblood and the lifeline of our transport systems, and also their livelihoods are depending on transport. So at SLOCAT, we have been working with the International Transport Workers Federation, or the ITF workers, to influence the global discussion on this very important issue. And we found that only a fifth of NDCs submitted under the Paris Agreement refer to a just transition in transport sector, which means that the workers dimension, it's still generally overlooked. And at the same time, studies have shown that walking and cycling infrastructure and EV charging infrastructure have the highest potential for multiplying employment opportunities comparing to other transport modes. And across 21 low and middle income countries worldwide, investing in public transport and vehicle electrification could create more than 15 million jobs by 2030. So the first step we need is social dialogues, incorporating the voices and the knowledge of workers into policy and planning for climate and sustainability actions, and also curate the dialogues not only among the workers, but with their unions, employers, and government. Subnational government, they play a very specific role in ensuring standards for decent work conditions, social insurances, skills and training opportunities, and also job security measures. We also can't forget workers. They're directly exposed and vulnerable to the escalating climate impacts on transport systems. So labor protection rights, safeguards against climate harms are very important, setting up contingency funds for those who have lost their jobs while they're facing floods or extreme climate weathers. So we must consider the impacts also to communities and indigenous people, that they are oftentimes the people that encounter challenges in land use planning, natural resources use, cultural practices disruption, displacements, noise, or other environmental concerns. We also need to pay specific attention to migrants, female and young workers, because knowing that their jobs are oftentimes disproportionately concentrated and are less secured and more exposed to climate hazards. And lastly, we also need to align climate finance with just transition objectives and with the appropriate benchmarks, assessments, and monitoring. So workers, they really have the on-the-ground knowledge that is really crucial for shaping the approaches for climate and sustainability actions. And they are also the one that actually operates the future system. So let's make sure that they are not left behind in this transition. Thank you.
That's right. It's so important to ensure a just transition, as you said. And indeed, we think about people and planet, but let's think about the people in that equation as well. Now, Marcella Jaramillo, obviously reaching, or rather trying not to surpass the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Agreement will require leveraging billions of dollars. We've just heard about the amounts from Mark earlier, some of the amounts, particularly from private sources. So what is the role of public institutions, including governments and multilateral development banks like the ADB, in enabling and leveraging the private sector funding to ensure that the market is geared towards not surpassing the 1.5 degree mark?
Sure, and indeed, this is often a big question. I think we are all very aware that the funding that we need to deliver all these transformations surpass really the capacity of public funding, NDV's funding, etc. So it's really about thinking how we can use this public funding to make a real catalytic effort to multiply the finance in the businesses, in the private sector, in the real economy. So what we found is that this required to really enable systematic changes and understanding where those systematic changes lie that will bring bigger kind of impact across the economy. And just to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. And just following in some of the examples from Latin America, in the case of Costa Rica, when the country was developing the long-term climate strategy, the decarbonization plan, we gathered around and we did all the process that I mentioned earlier. And in that process of identifying the barriers for them to actually transform the public sector, the public transport sector, they found a couple of issues. The first one is that when we sit down with the tariff regulator for the public transport, we realized that the equation that they use to set the prices for public transport were based on fossil fuel usage. And so it will not allow for integrating electricity as part of the equation to be able to set new tariffs that may be able to enable businesses to bring more electric buses. So the question there was, how do we change that? Working with the regulator so the country could enable that change. Without that simple change, it just would not happen. And that was just part of having the conversation with all the actors that we needed to have the conversation in the table. Additionally, they identified a few other challenges. Another important challenge is that the Ministry of Public Works and Transport in the country realized that they did not have the know-how or the capacity institutionally to support the country in how to redefine public transport and electric mobility, because most of their expertise and experience has been on roads, which is very similar to what you were just mentioning in terms of what has been their focus. So throughout this engagement and conversation, they realized, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to have an institutional change here. I need to understand what new divisions I need to create, what is the knowledge that I need to bring to my ministry, and what else we need to change so we are able to support the country in this direction that we want to go. So what happened in there is that, given that they identify some of these specific challenges with very clear champions and responsible in the country to make those happen, they partnered with an MDB, in this case with the Inter-American Development Bank, who provided technical assistance to analyze and reform the public tariff regulation so they can integrate electric vehicles as part of the equation, and also support the Ministry of Public Transport and Public Works to reform, to do an analysis of what is the staffing that they need, what are the changes they need in the institution to be able to support the country in this new transition. And now another very, very quick example from another country, and in this case, Chile, Santiago, the capital, already decided we want to expand our electric buses fleet. That's what we want to do. But what happened in that case is that they were not able to close the deals because the small business and buses owners did not have the capacity to finance, to buy the new electric buses. So what happened in there is this current model that we have been using for years is not working anymore for what we want to see. So what they did is they worked in partnership, in this case, with the World Bank to do technical assistance to really understand how they could transform that business model. And what they did is they realized that actually the whole business model could change, and the public utility companies could actually buy the buses. They have the financial leverage to do that and lease them to the bus drivers. This solution actually made quite happy the bus drivers and the companies that were making a revenue out of this. And now Santiago is one of the cities with the largest buses fleet in the world outside China, and this is something that can also be replicated in other cities and other countries. So this generates this catalytic change. So this is the areas where sitting together, doing this type of planning, and really identifying where are the barriers that need to be unlocked in partnership with multilateral development banks, big transformations can be seen and enable more of the solutions that we want to see on the ground.
Thank you for that, and great examples as well from Latin America, always good to hear. Now, Nakai-san, we've heard again and again this morning that indeed the ADB is the climate bank. We are beginning to truly embody that. And again, the staggering amounts of investment in terms of finance, increasing climate finance to $100 billion from 2019 to 2030. That's a real commitment there. So could you share some of the highlights of this ambition?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, that the 100 billion climate financing by 2030 could be that the ambitious targets for ADB. But as I mentioned, last year we achieved more or less kind of 10 billion climate financing already. It's kind of on track. But considering the actual implication of that 100 billion climate finance on the transport sector, as MDG mentioned in the morning, the transport sector is the biggest sector in ADB. Roughly speaking, 25% of our approval will be commitment going to transport sector. So considering that, out of 100 billion climate financing, we may reasonably expect that maybe 25%, so 25 billion, or maybe 30 billion could be allocated to the transport sector, particularly for the climate-friendly transport project in the future. So that would be a great opportunity for many of DMC countries to promote kind of climate-friendly, low-carbon transport modalities. In addition to that, recently we have discussed capital adequacy framework that is try to expand ADB's annual lending volume. Currently, ADB's annual lending volume is about 25 billion per year. That can be expanded to by 10 billion, or say by 40%, to 35 billion per year, which means that even that 100 billion climate financing amount by 2030 can be further increased because of that, the CAF framework. So it's more opportunity. Even I say that it's under the current assumption, it's more or less on track, but maybe we may have more opportunity to support kind of low carbon transport, a climate friendly transport project in the future under this new lending volume framework, so-called CAF. So with that, in the short term, if we are looking at maybe next 2-3 years, ADB's the transport pipeline project, mostly it's urban public transport project. As I mentioned already, 2023, the share of urban transport project is increased to 23% of overall transport project. But still, we have next 2-3 years, we have very strong the urban public transport project, in particular urban railway and the metro project in India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, and Vietnam. We have a lot of opportunities there. Bus rapid transit, public bus is another public transport project. That could be a little bit less robust kind of, the pipeline, but still we have many opportunities. Maybe Mongolia, Pakistan, maybe Cambodia, the PNG. So a lot of, public bus and several Central Asian countries, we have a lot of potential projects under this, the BRT or maybe public bus transport project. Beyond that, 2-3 years, longer term, maybe we may have, we consider some, emerging areas like green port development, like, DOTL Assistant Secretary mentioned in the first session, or maybe connected, shared, autonomous vehicle kind of mobility, or maybe new types of public transport like cable cars. In Latin America, there are several good examples for the cable car project as a public transport. And also a different perspective, low emission zone kind of concept to be in place in some countries and working very well. So we have some initial discussions already with several DMC for that kind of new initiative for longer perspectives. We are very much happy to collaborate with the DMC, how we can support that kind of low carbon transport modality in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. That's great to hear. Now, we've got about 15 minutes left in this session, and we have some great questions here in the Q&A. So I'm going to go to the Q&A now. Thank you for asking these questions. There's a particularly good one from Suva Lakshmi Sen, and she asks, how can we ensure climate mitigation through electrification of transport without a negative impact on conservation especially when we're also looking at the circular economy. So this is something I'm sure you look into all the time. Mark, you're nodding your head. Do you want to take a stab at that?
I must remember not to nod my head at strategic times. So I think one of the things that's incredibly important is, again, to be able to step back and have a look at the big picture. You know, transport is an essential service for the rest of the economy. The same goes for energy and so forth. It's the case that if we understand the services that are required, for example, for a circular economy, or for example, to ensure that we've got the kind of ecosystem services and other things operating, it means that we can tailor what we need to do in order to meet those into the future. In actual fact, you can increase transport density volumes changing to new technologies relatively easily, so you can reduce the footprint on land, you can change the electricity generation options you're using to provide that electricity, so you can reduce the footprint on the environment and so on. But I want to come back to this 2 points. Number one is, this means that we have to change the way we do a lot of our planning. We can't simply plan for transport in a silo. It's a whole economy set of planning that has to be done. And the second bit, and this comes back to some of the work that's being done in Laos and Vietnam, is that this sort of has to be done in partnership. We need to be able to involve some of the stakeholders for that just transition, but it's also the case that this partnership needs to include banks that can look across sectors, such as the Asian Development Bank, as well as analysts that can do the same. I want to make a plug for Data to Deal as a process to do this. This allows for very clear goals to be met, a very clear mandate for interministerial planning, and a space then for the mapping between very specific barriers, as Marcella was saying earlier on, to very specific streams of funding, which allows us to think about these kinds of questions and address them in a holistic way, and in a way that, you know, experience seems to show leverages more funding than we might otherwise think. Thank you.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for that. And again, Data to Deal provides so much clarity with the right kind of, you know, coherence, as you say. You need that. A couple more questions. Did anybody else want to take that question, by the way? And this is just around the circular economy and ensuring there's no negative impact on conservation. No one else? Okay, well, I'll move on to the next question then. This one from Eric Junior Ranola. Does developing clean energy sources, for example, solar, wind, and increasing the share of renewables to a country's energy portfolio help in easing the transition costs of adoption to low carbon transport? So perhaps we can hear from some of the countries represented here. Is this something that you're looking at, Mr. Mumu or Mr. Kong, in PNG or Cambodia?
Yeah, no, not from the energy sector as well.
Okay, all right, no worries. But in terms of what you've seen in your country, have you moved to other renewable energy sources, for instance, and has that eased the way into you know, the ability to achieve low carbon transport?
Thank you. Actually, since I'm not from the energy sector, so I don't have you know, accurate information. But as far as I know, that Cambodia right now, you know, try to develop the hydropower. So at the moment, over 40% of energy are from the hydropower plant. And secondly, we use also solar energy, and some percent we buy from our neighboring country, from Laos and also from Thailand. So right now, over 70% are renewable energy, but we still tackling by maybe we use choke coal for 30%. That's the report I heard from the Ministry of Energy. And I hope in the future we try maybe over 90% of renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mumu, what are you seeing in PNG?
Yeah, thank you very much. In PNG, the support and what we are advocating is also use of solar for our support to infrastructures and of course our needs, especially in the rural areas where electrification is there and is not there. Obviously, we have hydro. That's what we are going into very much and expanding in a big way. One issue that I missed out, and thank you for ADB for reminding us on your plans for public transport. I think introduction of electric vehicles for public transport in Port Moresby, one of the technical assistances with that ADB is providing to us is probably a low-hanging fruit for us. And thank you for that indication that ADB will continue to support us, because I think the important thing for us, observing, for those of you that have been to Port Moresby, we are looking at providing some incentives to the current operators so that we can introduce EVs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, it's great to hear that there is these clean energy sources, but I guess ultimately, will we see them helping in easing the transition costs of adoption of low carbon transport? Hopefully we will. Is that something you wanted to respond to as well, Mark?
Yeah, just one point. The work that we're doing in a number of countries, including the Laos and Vietnam case study, which we're doing together and under the Asian Development Bank, one of the things that we're doing is developing a simplified tool so you can concurrently look at transport planning as well as energy planning at the same time, so you can come up with this sort of coherent investment package, and done in such a way that it allows for very quick translation between the different ministries. So do look out for that when it comes. Thank you.
Yeah, these toolkits are crucial, aren't they? A little bit like the Green Roads toolkit that we just launched a little earlier. Now, I'll come to another question, unless there was anybody else who wanted to pick up on that. Yes, Nakai?
Yeah. As I mentioned, we have a lot of e-mobility program, e-bus program under the pipeline project. Not that mean energy sources is not only the condition we consider, but also that's the important factor we need to consider when actually we try to introduce kind of e-mobility in e-buses. For example, that for Tajikistan, or maybe the Kyrgyzstan, maybe Nepal, main power sources from that hydropower, that would be really clean kind of energy. So it's a good environment for that country to introduce kind of EVs, e-buses, kind of things for that. But some other countries, maybe 80% from coal power generations, that could be really, we need to really seriously think about how we can develop kind of e-mobility in particular countries. So we try to coordinate and collaborate with our energy team. So energy team has an energy transition mechanism that supports that kind of things, so that we have kind of one ADB team to support kind of energy transition as well as e-mobility launching kind of program for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Now, one more question, and this one, I guess, applies a little bit to what Alice was saying earlier. How can low-carbon transport be inclusive for all, where no economic class is left behind? This from John Angelo Turano. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you very much. And because I think piling on the question just now, when we're talking about electric vehicle, increasing the energy, renewable energy in transport, I think when we often talk about, addressing to your question, but when we often talk about energy and transport, we focuses a lot on the supply of renewable energy, which is very important. But at the same time, if we really want to have a just transition and an equitable transition towards low carbon transportation, we also really need to reduce energy demand in transport. And when we're doing that, we can provide integrated transport systems that have better access to public transport through bike sharing, through filling the gap with the last mile problem, walking and cycling infrastructure that are actually safe, providing opportunities for people that they can move around with options that are affordable, that are safe, and that are gender sensitive. And these things are so important because listening to that, and we often think that electric mobility is indeed almost like a silver bullet, like it's like, this is a thing that we need to go for sustainable transport. But actually only 1% of the global vehicle fleet are electric vehicles. And only 1/5 of that fleet uses electricity that is generated by renewable energy. So there's only so much that electric vehicles can do. And when we really focus on reducing energy demand, we also provide equitable access. We also ensure a just transition. We also make sure that people are not left behind in that process.
Thank you, Alice. That's great. Couple more minutes left. I'll try one more question.
Can I
Perhaps this is
add
something, Marcella.
something
Oh,
to
yeah,
that?
go ahead. You can respond to that as well.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to add something to this inclusivity for all. And what we have seen is in most of the countries where they plan the decarbonization, they plan the measures, they plan 2050 decarbonization, they find that the cost benefit of doing that is always, the benefits are so much greater than the cost of doing that. So this is a very good news for a country as a whole. The issue is that the distribution of those benefits is uneven. And so there is where we really need to pay attention about who may be, getting more benefits or who may be more affected. And when we do that, we need to think it through many different aspects of delivering that transition. And just to give you an example, a role of a government can be how to think to ensure that these benefits are well distributed across the economy, so people from low-income families can benefit from affordable, reliable, and clean transportation, where the cost of goods and food, for example, is not increased by the cost of, for example, new technologies that can generate more cost in the transport of these goods, etc. And just a very quick example, and again, from Costa Rica, but a very helpful one, is that the country realized that when they were going to transition to reduce number of cars because they wanted more public transport, and when they wanted to reduce the fossil fuel usage in cars to use electricity, they will impact 20% of the fiscal revenues of the country that were tied to taxes to fossil fuel and to buying the cars. So there was a big concern here from the Ministry of Finance, like that's 20% of my revenue. I need to think about that. So what happened in there was an analysis that was done with them to understand what will be the gap, when will that gap happen, and what they could do about that fiscal gap. And what they realized is that the gap was manageable. It won't happen immediately, so they have time to prepare for that. And there were a number of different tax solutions that will enable them to redistribute the benefits that were so much greater to the society, to be able to enable a green fiscal matrix that will cover that gap, but that will continue to enable people to have access to affordable transport, that will enable them to really get the electric vehicles and have a taxi system that will consider the distributional impacts. So this is just how it goes to many different policies and elements when planning the transition.
Thank you so much for that. And that kind of brings us towards the closing of the session. But before we go, I'm going to do the same thing I did in the last panel session, which is to all ask you whether you are optimistic or pessimistic on whether we will achieve a low carbon future. So let's start with you, Nakai-san. Obviously, you've talked about how much the ADB is committed to this. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Yeah, I have to say optimistic.
Great.
Yeah. Well, actually, there are a lot of challenges here and there, particularly in that new area, the low carbon transport. Normally, the executing agency's capacity may not be sufficient. Maybe a lack of policy framework, the planning, regulatory framework. These needs to be improved. So there are a lot of things we need to do, and also particularly for urban project, it's very complicated, involving many agencies. So these are challenges, but I'm very optimistic to overcome these challenges. Thank you very much.
One optimist there. Marcella, quick 10 seconds, optimist or pessimist, and why?
Very optimistic.
Great.
And actually being here for me is a show of that. Like I am coming from Latin America. I work with multiple kind of development banks, and I am invited to a transport forum. So we're really connecting the dots and having a very positive conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Two optimists, fantastic. Let's go for another one.
And
Alice?
the number 3 optimist here. I do think that we see the momentum. I mean, we know what needs to be done to move away from a car-centric model of development. We need to stop those people that are taking interest and profiting in these kind of really unsustainable models at the expense of people and the planet. And I think we know what to do, and we just need to do it at the scale and at the speed that is required.
Excellent. 3 optimists. Wonderful. Yes, a round of applause. Mr. Mumu, perhaps this can apply to your country specifically. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Thank you. Optimistic, obviously.
Good.
But one issue is for PNG, introducing e-mobility require investments in supporting infrastructures. Example, charging stations, tax and import duty exemptions to bring electric vehicles. Some of these affect revenue and creates obstacles for governments. That relates to the subject I did mention earlier in relation to introducing public transport CVs. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. We've got lots of optimists.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Kong.
I try to force myself to be optimistic.
A forced optimist.
But I think my real answer is like 50-50.
Oh.
If you look at the midterm review of the SDG, we are far behind our schedule. You know, by now only 50%. We are on the halfway. We got only 50% success. So, and like this, I quoted 48% are of severely of the track, and 37% we have not touched anything. So if we want to be optimistic, we have to gather all together to start from now.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great. 4 optimists, 1 50-50. Come on, Mark, you got to tip the balance here.
I'm an academic, so I have to like caveat things quite carefully.
Great.
And so on. I think that with political will, but also with and embracing some of the opportunities that are out there and some of the thinking that's out there, there is massive opportunity. So I think that that's absolutely there. I want to challenge something that was said earlier on. For example, somebody was talking about, you know, transport and renewable energy, and, you know, is the energy sector moving fast enough? Well, in actual fact, you can turn that around. The transport sector can potentially drive the transformation in the energy sector because, you know, pound for pound, the cost of fuel from electricity is lower than that from fossil fuels. And this is a completely different dynamic that we've not been able to explore just yet. So I think that the potential for change is much bigger than we think.
Okay.
But I also think it's incredibly important that this gets done together. We're going to see local solutions that are going to be creative and, you know, with the right kind of mixing and matching with development finance organizations and international partners. I think there's something quite special there. But I want to.
You haven't answered the question, optimist or pessimist?
Yeah, so I just want to thank my colleague from Cambodia, because I think that it's qualified optimism.
Okay.
We need to see the opportunity, we need to move, and we need to grasp it.
Okay,
So
qualified optimism.
A challenge to all of us.
Perfect, indeed, and a great way to end the session. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, truly insightful. And thank you too for all your great questions as well. And yes, you can go off for lunch now and network some more and perhaps ask our panelists some of the questions that we didn't get to answer, to ask them. Thank you all. We'll see you later. Yeah, thank you. Oh, we need to get our photo.